I have met so many talented developers over the years who really struggled to get into interviews, and it usually was directly because of a very unprofessional, sloppy, or unfocused CV. And I know when I started applying for jobs, this was something I really struggled with as well. So I'm hoping now that I've been on both sides of the interview process that I can help other developers get over that first hurdle. We are going to go over a lot of the common mistakes I see a lot of developers make in their CV writing. And then I'm going to go through a sample CV section by section so you can see how I would structure a CV if I was writing one now. Let's jump into the common mistakes. And one of the major ones I see all the time is not tailoring your CV for each role. Make sure in the header you include the job title that you are actually applying for. This at least tells the person who is reading your CV that you have sent the correct CV to them and that you are applying for that role. What do I mean? Well, if you're a web developer and you're applying for a JavaScript developer role on a site, then they want to know that you've tailored your CV for this JavaScript developer role. So you aren't just batch sending this out. So that way you can highlight the skills that you have with JavaScript or whatever other technology it is that you're applying for on your CV. You might have a very varied skill set, but by not highlighting what's relevant for the current job that you're applying for, you can get filtered out very quickly. Another very common mistake I see is GitHub links with no real value. And that means you're better off not putting a GitHub link on your CV at all if there's nothing on it. So if you only have a couple of Hello World applications, you're probably not going to want people to start looking through it to get an estimate on how good you are. So if you include a GitHub link, make sure you have some of your recent work on it or that you have something you're proud of on it. Because if you put a link, people will look for it. Having specific projects linked on your CV is a must-have. If you're not talking about the projects and the problems you've solved, it's very hard to gauge what you do as a developer, how you bring value to a team, or where your skills actually lie. So if you're fresh out of college or out of a boot camp, make sure you polish up some projects you made there. I would even recommend, if you can, reach out to some family friends or anyone you can and ask, can you do them up a website or a web app just to have a project or two up there? It doesn't have to be anything too crazy, but it just shows that you can actually do the job. So if you don't have projects listed on your CV, it's going to be very hard to hire people. This is a major pet peeve of mine, and that is bar charts for skills. I don't understand when I get a CV and somebody says they are 80% good at CSS. Yes, it might make your CV look prettier, but it makes no sense when I'm hiring, if I'm reading and I'm trying to gauge, where did you get this 80%? Is this 80% out of your skills, or is this 80% of all CSS? There is no actual metric to understand how this stands up against, I suppose, your other skills or the best person out there at this skill. So I would just recommend leaving it off and saying that you have skills in particular areas. This one is definitely linked to the last one a little bit, but this goes back to trying to be a little bit too creative. And by adding too much color and trying to be too out there with the layouts and everything else, you end up making yourself look a little bit more junior than you have to. You might think you're trying to stand out, but for somebody that has to read the CV and put it against other people who might have just clearly explained what they're good at a first step, you just look a little bit more junior. So avoid going over the top. I enjoy a splash of color and things like that, but a lot of recruiting software will just strip it all out anyway. And often what will happen by being too creative, you'll end up with a bad format that can't be read by the HR software anyway. So it ends up being counterintuitive because you've put too much time in designing and now the software can't read your skill set and actually filter you out as a potential good fit for this job. There is a high churn rate in the tech industry, and everyone is trying to hire people who will stay with them for a couple of years at least. So if you have a history of jumping from job to job, it is going to be brought up, and it might even stop you from getting into the job in the first place. I myself was a contractor for a long time in my earlier career, and the way I got around this, because I was doing 6 months at a time, was I had my own business and I used that as the main business. So I didn't say I moved from business to business. I just said I worked for Niall, Joe Maher Limited, and I had these projects while I was there. If you're actually just jumping from job to job, though, it's going to be something that will bite you. So be careful with what you accept if you seem to be getting into places that you have to run away straight away. And if you are hopping around a lot, you should probably be looking at consulting or something else if that's the kind of path you want to take. The tone of a CV can really help you as well. Again, even if you're applying for junior positions, you don't have to sound immature or very young or junior when you're applying for them. So if you're writing a paragraph about yourself, you don't need to write some flowery creative piece about yourself. Be professional and concise and say what you need to say to get the point across. If people are interested in you based on your skill set, they will get back to you. They don't need to read about you being overly enthusiastic, ambitious, and all the other buzzwords that everyone throws into their CVs. You will stand out by getting to the point. The last common mistake I see is people just not spell checking their stuff. So grab Grammarly or a tool like that. It's a free tool you can get on Chrome, and you can just run your CV through it. And I think you can even use it on Google Docs now, and it will scan your whole document and give you a quick grammar check and point out any typos you have. So let's jump into a CV and walk through how I would actually create one now. And this is a template I have prepared for this. I have a sample CV here for a guy called John Fakerson, but this is heavily based on the last CV I've built for myself and an article I wrote for Free Code Camp that was very popular on writing a better developer CV. So I am going to include this in the description below for anyone that wants it afterwards so they can hack it to make it their own, but just so you can see the general structure that I go with. The header should include your name, contact details, a link to maybe your GitHub if you have relevant stuff up there, your website, definitely your email and phone number as a bare minimum so people can actually get back to you. You should definitely have the role you're applying for there as well. As you can see here, in this instance, we're applying for a JavaScript developer role, or John Fakerson is applying for a JavaScript developer role. The next section then is the introduction. The intro should be brief and professional. It should be less of an introduction and more of a headline. It should be a teaser that makes the reader feel like it's worth reading on. You're better having a single focused sentence here than rambling on about how enthusiastic you are. And trust me on that, people can tell when people are rambling just by reading. As you can see here, I have a senior engineer with over 6 years of commercial experience in software development, experience in leading teams, mentoring engineers, and software architecture. So straight away, a reader can tell what this person is all about. The next section is the technical skill set. This is something I don't often see, but I think is super useful to show how relevant you are for the role. So this is probably the easiest thing to have tailored for the specific roles you're applying for. So As a JavaScript developer, I just wanted to point out all the relevant tools that I use that might be useful for the job I'm applying for. So I obviously, number one, have JavaScript, but being a web developer, I'll probably need to know some HTML5, CSS3. Node.js is going to be a big one for any of the backend development. I'm going to show that I've worked with some databases here like Firebase, MongoDB, and MySQL. We're going to also talk about what frameworks and libraries we've used like React, D3, jQuery, AngularJS, and if we have some experience with version control. These headers can be changed. Maybe you want to change these to like operating systems you worked with or other things that are more relevant to what you're applying for. This is a very easy way to just highlight your skills at a glance. Next is the professional experience. If you are just looking for your first job, this section is always the most terrifying because you probably feel like you don't have much worth mentioning. There is no easy way to fill this out other than building your experience. So if you have no job experience, I would definitely start listing some of the projects you've built here. So if you're making experience based on stuff you've done in college or for personal projects, you don't have to highlight it's a personal project or a college project. Just talk about the project and the problems you solved to finish it. So for everyone else who has some experience, this is kind of the way I structure it. So for professional experience, I always start with the company name, the job title at the company, and the dates I worked at it. This summary then, under it, should be brief, focused, and include relevant bullet points to show at a glance the things you're proud of that you worked on there. We're going to talk about your responsibility to start. So it was here we're saying it was my responsibility to architect and lead the development for a greenfield project to drive customer engagement. The team I led consisted of 6 developers whose roles varied depending on expertise. The new architecture led to increase in the average daily usage of 15 minutes to 1 hour. So we're showing a metric that I have helped increase, or John Fakerson has helped increase. And how did we solve that? That was achieved by creating a progressive web application with push notifications and reducing the initial load sizes by 90% versus the existing application. We also fixed scaling issues by moving most of the functionality to Lambdas on AWS. So that's a small summary, but it's very concise and tells you how the problems were solved and that I understand the value that was driven by them. I then bullet point that out. I say I increased customer engagement, drastically reduced the loading times on the application, and led a team of 6 developers. It's also worth pointing out here the tech stack you worked on for that project. You can ignore this line here. I just obviously forgot to take it out when I was finishing editing this document. I'll take it out for the finished one. And for the second company, it's pretty much the same. I just have some boilerplate bullet points here to point out some of the things you should put in. So make sure you include all the roles and responsibilities you had, as well as any achievements. Make sure you include the team sizes because a company will be interested to see if you've worked with huge teams or small teams, the projects that you worked in that company, the technology used, and as you can see, I'm just saying continue in this way. Just make sure you have it down. The education and training is important as well. So make sure you put the degree down here. Obviously, you're going to want to highlight that and any achievements or merits you've gotten with that. The nice part of this as well is it doesn't have to be just official degrees and everything else. If you've completed some Udemy courses recently or anything else that's relevant, throw it down here as well. I always put in a technical courses completed section just so I can highlight that I am staying up to date. I also like to include what year I finished those courses so people know how relevant it is, because as everyone knows, technology changes from year to year. So as long as I have some recent courses done, I'm going to have some understanding of a subject. Now, probably more than ever, this other section can be used to your benefit because Most companies want to see that you're more than just a one-dimensional coding robot, and it can also help to start a conversation in the interviews. You can put in some personal details here. I actually usually include that I'm a Star Wars collector, and that's come up in a couple of interviews when I've gotten into them. This is a big thing for people now because culture is something that can't be taught to people. So by seeing you like to get out and socialize and other things like that might really be advantageous when you're applying for jobs. I have put in a humble brag here, say member of Code for Ireland. So if you're a member of any meetups and you're taking the time outside of work to upskill as well, or at least stay up to date, this is probably somewhere you can kind of add it in as well. Also then just something like cycling to show that you leave the house every so often. But also it's okay to be honest. If you like to play computer games, throw in you like to play computer games. Depending on who you're dealing with, there is a conversation waiting to happen here. The last bit I would include is references. If you are very junior, I would go out of my way to get a couple of names and phone numbers that you can put directly on this. So I had often put references that are available upon request when I had been working for a few years because I was afraid of the company I was applying for ringing the company I was currently working at and then something not working out. If you don't have any risk, as in you're looking for your first job, find a couple of people. And this goes back to building your own experience. If you can build a website or web app for somebody you know and get them to be a reference for you, it's going to look a lot stronger at the end of the day that you have literally pointed out saying, hey, call this person, I worked with them on this project and they'll vouch for me. As humans, we always appreciate the reviews of other humans. You can see that when we're looking at Amazon reviews or anything else, that the social power really does suggest what we think at the end of the day. If you want to grab the CV I was going through here as a boilerplate for your own, I'll put it in the description below. And if you have any tips for developers or questions, you can leave them in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. And until next time, happy coding.